And Cape Town, on the other hand, is apartheid's best work. It is infrastructurally, superstructurally the most effectively built apartheid city that apartheid's ever did.
Yeah.
And me and my brother who edits the show were called Sons of the Soy once. And we were like, I can't hate that.
It's just ingenious.
That's objectively really good. Like, I didn't think people like you with your beliefs had that capacity. There are white men who don't get jobs because of race quota prioritizations of companies. That does happen. Is it a common experience? I don't think so. No data seems to suggest that. Pale males leaving South Africa, I just think there needs to be a little bit more honesty about the fact that many people like this have extreme privilege and they just want to go and experience more of it with fewer complications. We should all talk about that. And the next time you complain about paying tax for a welfare grant, you should think that this is a minuscule contribution compared to what white South Africans were getting as recently as when your dad was alive.
Welcome to Colorful. My name is Senamile Zungu and I am here with my best friend Stacey Jane, and we are back for another episode, our first for 2025, talking all things race, privilege and living life in full color. If you are watching us from video, you may notice something a little bit different about our setup today. Stace?
Oh, I'm so excited. This is our very first time in a live studio. So before this, we've been recording virtually, and yeah, we're super stoked.
Another reason to be super stoked is because today we have what I call like our dream guest. No, seriously. I know.
I'm leaving.
Okay, I'm not like fangirling you or like love bombing you or whatever, but we have our dream guest. You may know him as the host of the hit ENCA show, The Dan Corder Show, radio host, TikToker, and South Africa's very own beanie aficionado.
Beanie aficionado.
Hello, Dan Corder.
How are you guys?
So good, so good.
Yeah, thank you. You nailed that intro, by the way. You guys are natural studio hosts. Very
Really?
good.
With no teleprompter, just for the record.
No
We're the
auto
record
cue.
show.
Cameraman cuts to BTS fourth wall breaking panorama of many people with phones who are not ready to be on screen right now.
Dan, where is your beanie?
My 3 beanies.
Your 3 times beanies.
Are in the car.
Oh.
It's been a really long day. This is our 4th recording of the day.
Yeah.
And they have extremely strict tech riders. And most people can't afford them. So they're currently taking some R&R in a closed car. They will be fine. They're not like a puppy. You don't need to roll down the window. They're doing fine.
Oh, really? Okay, we'll just keep them in our thoughts as we...
And prayers.
And prayers.
And prayers. Whatever denomination you subscribe to, we will welcome them at the 3 Beanies Network.
Very nice, very nice. So speaking of beanies, we have something for you today. Do you want to pass that down to Dan?
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
That, for those listening, is a bottle of red nail polish.
Ooh.
So Senna, show your nails.
Okay.
So we always rock one hand of red nails, right?
Right.
Yes.
And our challenge for you today is to paint one hand red. Can you do that?
Yes.
You can?
I've never done it, but I will.
Oh, please do that for us today.
By the end of the episode or
No,
right now?
Like right
now.
Okay.
You can put the mic down
Okay.
because there's another one
Right.
as a backup. So guys, the point of the red nails, kind of like Dan's beanie, is we're all about red, right? We believe red is all about sort of taking action, making a stand, intentionally entering conversations that feel uncomfortable. I guess the other question is why nails? Senna?
We just do it for the plot. We're fashion girlies, okay?
We're action girlies.
And also because this is like, guys, I'm dying. I love seeing this right now. Look at Dan, you are killing it.
I am not. But thank you very much for your kind words. This is going poorly, but I am enjoying it.
A for effort. It's strangely soothing, right?
I chew my nails so much. There is so little real estate to work with right now.
Getting
It's
your nails
fine.
done. Getting your nails done is actually a perfect way to stop that because I do that quite often too.
Yeah.
You know,
But
the gag is he doesn't know whether we have nail polish remover here or not.
Yeah, I did immediately think, am I on TV tomorrow? Nah, that's fine. This is actually strangely soothing. Am I supposed to be entertaining while I'm doing this?
Well,
we're just go ahead.
Okay.
If you are in the zone right now. But speaking of that, what's like sort of the
Sorry,
most...
quick pause. How do I know when I'm done?
When you've painted the fifth nail, you be done.
Right. You know, you would never believe this, but I was born and raised in a matriarchy, and I have 3 sisters and a mother, and I have never done this before. I'm kind of like disappointed in myself, but also really enjoying this cultural experience of humiliating myself on this show.
You're doing so amazing.
I'm
Nothing
not.
like a little bit of reframing of femininity, you know? It's so powerful.
Yes, and so much of this nail polish is on my skin, which is not the design, but that's fine.
What's the
I
most
look like I've chewed my nails to bleeding.
No, but that looks great. Can we see that?
What happens
you
when you
did-
paint directly on skin?
It just comes off.
Okay.
It just,
You want to try it? There you go.
what are you writing there?
L.
He's writing.
LOL.
Oh, very nice.
At my attempt. On my palm. LOL at this attempt at Dan being done. That doesn't even spell
Hey,
LOL.
don't be
That's a
self-deprecating.
mess. Okay, I'm back.
Okay, you're back. There you go. Is this the most bizarre thing anyone's ever asked you to do in an interview?
No.
Okay. Oh, no.
But I can't talk about what they asked me to do.
Okay. What's the most bizarre thing that you've asked someone to do in the name of
I
content?
asked Jack Parrow to sit on my producer because we did a content piece. Do you remember Star on a Reasonably Priced Car from Top Gear? So instead we did a star on a reasonably priced bra. And the bra was my producer. So Jack Parrow's under I Love That Man. He sat on my producer, Andrique, for 25 minutes. Because it was a social experiment to try and figure out if people in a moment of doing something very unnatural, arguably extremely discomforting another human, would respond to questions in the same way, or whether they would strip them of their PR training and make them seem much more sincere. And well, that's what I told my bosses. I just wanted Jack to sit on Andrique. That was it.
Love it.
I love the justification.
By
Love
far
it.
the strangest thing I've ever done.
Oh, I think it's fabulous. Here's another strange one. It's not all that strange because a lot of people do it. But you've recently kind of moved into Cape Town, right? On Cape Talk now, which is great to hear you there. I guess we're kind of interested in how have you experienced the change in terms of culture, like diversity in Cape Town versus Joburg? Have you experienced any of that?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm Cape Town born and raised and moved to Johannesburg about 4 years ago. And a lot of people flippantly say it, but I've thought way too much about the radical difference between not just Cape Town and Johannesburg, but Cape Town and the rest of South Africa. Joburg obviously is very different from the rest of South Africa too, but it is the beating heart center of where many people from all over South Africa go to try and make something of themselves, to try and craft some kind of identity and future. And so many exciting things are happening all the time in Johannesburg that often includes a lot of the fullness of South African life. And Cape Town, on the other hand, is apartheid's best work. It is infrastructurally, superstructurally the most effectively built apartheid city that apartheid's ever did. Johannesburg, a much more commercial city where in 100 years you build, you break down, you remake, you build, you break down, you remake. So spatially, literally, structurally, Johannesburg is more free, more open, more able to create new things. And so moving back to Cape Town, it's just been really interesting because there are a bunch of unique eccentricities to Cape Town that make it very different. For example, the fact that the vast majority of wealthy people are white. The vast majority of wealthy people in Cape Town speak English rather than Afrikaans, which is very different from many other parts of the country. The vast majority of middle and working class people in Cape Town are coloured and of a Cape coloured identity rather than coloured identities in other parts of the country. And then the vast majority of extremely poor people are Black South Africans, most of them also from the Eastern Cape. And so it is a radically different place, unlike anywhere else in the country and the world. And yet so divided, as I said, because, at the mountain, rich whites. Further from the mountain, poorer whites. Road, highway, train line, richer colored people, poorer colored people. Road, highway, train line, the physical division of people, richer Black people, poorer Black people, and then poverty-stricken people living in townships. There's nothing else like it to this extent of severity and uncompromisingness in the whole country. And I think that's partially also because Cape Town is like 350 years old. It's a long time to get it white. I nearly said right.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that because I think that out of every major city in South Africa, I am so acutely aware of my Blackness every time I'm in the city. And the experience is so discomforting for me, but also something so new for me. Joburg is such a different scene. So on an even like more anecdotally level and a feeling, let's say diversity was a feeling, right? I just am acutely aware that I'm Black in the city, which is very trippy. And it's one of the reasons I always say I would not move here, not hating in any Cape Townians, but it would be very difficult, I think.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, every Black South African I know who lives in Cape Town says basically the same thing as you. I was at a party a week ago, and two of my mates were saying to each other, both of them Black, that Cape Town's actually changed quite a lot in the last 4 or 5 years. Maybe a COVID thing, maybe people, Black South Africans having gained a certain amount of wealth in Johannesburg or elsewhere, moving here or something. But these two Black South Africans who are both in the creative scene were saying that only in the last year was the first time they could imagine going to a party in Cape Town with majority Black people at it.
Really?
In like Cape Town International.
Wow.
And by that I mean around the CBD and Greenpoint and whatever, which is remarkable. Like, and not remarkable as in like amazing, like obviously amazing that it's now happened, but it's remarkable that 4 years ago that was unimaginable to two highly powerful, highly successful, famous in one case, creatives. I'm not saying the other one is not as talented, just not front of camera famous. They're both great.
Yeah. See, I like that sort of personal lens to it. And I think that's a big part of the reason why we started Colourful is we noticed that in conversations, at least in mainstream media about race and privilege, there's this sort of almost, it can get very intellectual, right? And people feel intimidated by speaking on a public platform like a podcast on strictly this topic. But we really have a huge amount of respect for the way that you use your platforms to educate, but also highlight structural inequalities.
Thank you.
Do you think that the media landscape right now in South Africa is doing enough to highlight these structural inequalities and have these conversations that are, quite frankly, uncomfortable, but shouldn't be, as a matter of fact?
I think it's happening more than it used to, but it's not gone far enough. So I remember during Rhodes Must Fall, I was a campus radio presenter at UCT, and Tumani Makale threw shit on the statue and 2 hours later walked up what was then Jamie Steps and did his first interview to me. I was right in the heart of that, because before he had walked up the steps to do that interview, already there were hit pieces on him in a variety of mainstream media publications. And my role in Rhodes Must Fall was this random guy who had a radio show on a campus radio station with virtually no listeners, because campus radio stations don't have listeners. And the four lists would do interviews with me because they knew that I would just let them talk. It was like a very much like, here's the microphone. Because in every other context, they're not even being interviewed, let alone having their side heard or being fairly portrayed. Yeah. And at that time, it was like, I already knew it intellectually, but it was a real life example of how the predominant readership for the vast majority of the major media publications, newspapers were still a thing. Does anybody remember those? But
you
even
won't. You definitely won't. I remember them.
But even the online readership was predominantly, like the audience was understood to be white and wealthy and of a particular political identity. And so the vast majority of hit pieces, think pieces, even just observational journalism fulfilled their worldview that like these four lists were spoiled brat children who had no legitimate criticisms, no legitimate complaints. It's all just feels and the woke mind virus, whatever. And they should just shut up and deal with it. And I think that South African media has evolved in the last handful of years. I think it is far more easy now to open a newspaper and see any old person getting criticized, or not open up a newspaper. It's far more hard to do that at all.
Hard. Yeah, exactly.
But there's still this understanding that the sponsors, the advertisers want well-educated, middle-class and up readers, generally who've gone through university, who've had a good education, and those are still overwhelmingly white folks. And so that is the framing through which we need to understand what most of media works for the approval of.
And then, of course, there's the having your own platforms, right, where you're not held to those same standards. How have you experienced that?
TikTok's great.
So we see.
You're on TikTok?
So we see.
I haven't seen you. Probably not doing that great.
So the TikTok was the reason. TikTok was how I got the life that I've always wanted, the career that I've always wanted, which is, and I always have to be very clear here, and I'm being sincere about this. When I worked at Good Up FM, I was a young presenter, and the task was to do what Good Up FM needed for its audience, and I loved that, and I was happy with that. And there's an interesting thing as a personality radio presenter where you need to be yourself, but it still needs to be commercially viable and sensible for the station, and it also still needs to do right by the audience. Good Up FM is an overwhelmingly colored middle class to working class radio station. And it would have been commercially wrong, but also ethically wrong and disrespectful to that community for me to go in and be like, well, I went to UCT and my parents are white academics and I'm one of the most academically privileged people in this country. And so I'm going to exert my lived experience on this radio station. And so the bind was, I'm answering a different question now, I just realized. The bind was how to appreciate, not appropriate, and be a good custodian of this community's platform, enhancing and celebrating colored identity on the station while still trying to be as true to myself as I possibly could. And then when I went to 5, they said, do what you want. But again, I knew you're on the breakfast show. You have maybe 3 to 9 minutes of somebody's attention. You've got to entertain them. You've got to entertain the kids. You've got to entertain the advertisers. You've got to entertain the project of what 5FM was. And so 5 said to me, we want you to be you. Go talk about the politics. Go talk about the news. We think the youth wants to talk about that. It's just nobody's been given a platform to talk as a young person to young people. And I appreciated that. But what TikTok allowed me to do was do that unfettered, because I was always holding myself back on 5, being like, at some point by minute 12 on the NPA, I would tune out from this. I would tune out from this myself and I am talking. But what TikTok allowed me to do is go, no, I'm actually just really interested in this and I want to talk about it, and allowed me to play with like a visual medium. And that Stacey, what I wanted to say was, it's not necessarily fully free, because I never committed to being a full-time influencer who would just be paid by advertisers and platforms. I always have in the back of my mind that the most powerful vector of broadcasting is still traditional legacy media. Okay. And so I didn't want to, I remain conscious of being careful how I use those platforms so I can still be employable, hireable, attractive to mainstream media. Absolutely. But TikTok allowed me to do all that. And then when I got that response, it allowed me to do YouTube. And then I got that response, it allowed me to do TV and quit that kind of radio and now do this kind of radio. So yeah, the creativity and the freedom of those kinds of platforms, if you know what you're doing and if you have a clear vision, is amazing. Changed my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. I guess, it's an interesting thing because we, Senna and I, so this Colourful podcast it's only been running for just less than a year. And an interesting comment that we get from a lot of people when they meet with us is, oh, this is very novel that you're doing this, talking about race, that's really big. And their automatic assumption is that there's been some kind of backlash. So they always say, so what has been the response? And like, are you in trouble? Has there been, how have you dealt with being cancelled? Or, I mean, we don't have enough followers to be cancelled just yet.
That's for us.
But I guess I want to ask you the same question. Do you feel like you have to sanitize topics not to be cancelled? Or are you able to talk freely the way you've described freely?
Yeah, so ENCA is great. They're like, because what was nice about that conversation with ENCA when we agreed on the show was they were just like, we just want you to do what you're doing over there, over here. And I was like, I can do that. So that was great. Yeah. And ENCA doesn't have a process of like fastidiously chopping stuff out of my show or doing like serious editorial oversight, what. And I guess I've gained that trust to a degree. All broadcasters have to gain the trust of their employer in that. Sure, I'm making this sound very business transactional, not very romantic, like for the love.
For the love of the content.
But I learned when I started on TikTok that I was going to be used to fulfill a variety of different political agendas and ethical agendas, and that if I either had to pick a position, which would be inauthentic to my real life experience of the world, or I had to go the other way and go, I don't give a fuck what you think. I'm going to say what I think on every single thing and then take the blows. And I found that to be better. And now it's an hilarious situation where, what's it this week? This week, the DA thinks that I'm being paid for by the ANC. Last week, the EFF thought I was being paid for by MK. In December, MK thought I was being paid for by the EFF. The ANC thought I was being paid for by the DA the week before that, and so it goes.
And the gag is that 2 of them asked you to be MPs, right?
No, not those 2.
Not those two, but in general.
Not those 2. Good deep cut to remember that. That's good. So I just, people are going to watch 1 or 2 of your things and then develop a sense of who you are. And if it is against their agenda, they'll try to rip you to shreds. And if it's for their agenda, they'll love you until suddenly you say something that doesn't fit their agenda. And I chose to just continue to say things the way I want to say them, partially because it makes me feel better, because this is me. This is my personhood. And when somebody comes up to me at a bar at midnight and says, hey, listen, I just want to tell you about the Avia beer. And I'm like, okay, At least you really know what I think. That's great. And that happened like 2 weeks ago.
No, stop.
That was not a hypothetical example. But also because there's something that's happened in America where they have an understanding that political commentators are sometimes just themselves and not fighting for an agenda. But the only way that someone like Jon Stewart earned the right to be thought of that way was for years and years just keep talking.
Yeah.
Because eventually people would go, oh, I can't pretend that he's a hardcore Democrat. He's criticized the Democrats tons. I can't pretend that he's like a neocon for the Republicans. Look at his body of work. And South Africa doesn't have that culture yet. There are not South Africans in public, popular intellectual media who've been thinking and talking freely for long enough such that we go, I don't think he has an agenda. And I'm trying to get that for myself. And I just do believe that if I keep going, eventually the vast majority of reasonable people are going to go, fuck, he just says what he wants, I'll be honest. Like sometimes we like it, sometimes we don't. But in all this body of evidence, we can't say he's fighting for these people or these people or these people. And that's the faith that I have to do what I do.
And Dan, I think you're doing a great job of that because there have been a lot of accusations of you being captured, right? And I think it's also complex because, I mean, you stay true to yourself, but you have to always reinforce that trust. But how do you then determine what conversations to participate in and which ones to sit out, especially as a white male?
Totally. So I am not the kind of person who's going to talk about everything. I don't feel entitled to do so. I also just like peace. And sometimes I want to experience South Africa as just a citizen who reads the news, as opposed to someone who's like, well, this is what I think. I picked that accent very quickly. That was very organic. That kind of...
You call South Africa a watch party, a movie, and then we're at the watch parties.
Yeah. So sometimes when I pick what news I want to talk about, it's because it interests me and I think it matters. And I'll particularly talk about something if I think it matters way more than the public is giving it credit for. And I usually don't think that that's a failing of the public. I think that's usually a failing of some kind of media portrayal of South Africa. So the NPA, I'll talk about the NPA all the time. The NPA matters so much. Shamila Batoyi is more important. I nearly said Siya Kolisi. That's tricky. Shamila Batoyi is so important. And we should be thinking and knowing about the work that she does all the time. So I'll always talk about that. And then when it comes down to positionality on certain things, and some people will say, oh, this is a black person's issue, or this is the colored community's issue. I'm hypersensitive to that for a few reasons. Well, I mean, the obvious reason being that in terms of positionality, it's just not my place as a white, able-bodied, middle class, genuinely one of the most blessedly educated people in South Africa, because both of my parents are prolific academics. And I come from a particular worldview, and it's not my place to say, well, I know best on this. And that's an important tone, because sometimes you don't know best, but you do know some things. And so I'm not claiming I know best about something, but I do know some things. But then I won't say them if somebody else has said it who is better positioned than me.
Yeah.
I remember during Rose Must Fall, people would stand up on Plaza and be like, yeah, this is what I think. And I'll be like, well, you're white. And a black person 2 minutes ago said the same thing. So you did not need to say that. Why did you center yourself to say that? So sometimes when there are parts of a debate or discourse or a conversation that I feel are lacking, I will look for people who are saying those things and I will try to raise up their voices. That's the point. So like on the Dan Corder show, like I often have the know-it-alls on, Fez Mtonti and Ayanda Charlie, because they say fascinating things. Sometimes I have like the start of that idea, but then I discover they've done it way better than me. So just have them on. Or if I'm going to make a TikTok about it, just be like, hey, so this is going on. I just want to tell you what these people think. It's not my idea. It's just listen to Fezi. She's so smart. She knows so many things. And that's how I kind of negotiate that.
So actually, I'm just going to mention this because I also think it's a perfect example. Warabile, who's Mashed Not Potatoes, a correspondent on your show, we met up a few weeks ago and we had this discussion because I remember visiting your show and people would ask questions. He was just starting out and you would engage the live audience and say, well, he's right here, ask him. And I looked at that as such a subtle way, but to also amplify him and give him credits. And I think, well, at least from the conversations we've had, he's also very grateful for that. So,
well, yeah, I do pay him. So he would say that.
He said all great things. So actually also, you spoke about the sentiment around being woke, right? And you being dismissed of either being woke. What what's the journey? Can you take us through the journey of wokeness? Because I was with a colleague a few weeks back. And
She pointed
said
at
to
me. I wasn't there.
not
I'm not the colleague that she's about to tell the story about.
Not this colleague.
Okay.
But she was like, isn't woke being a great thing? And I'm like, I've never met anyone who's ever described themselves as woke.
Interesting.
No, in the beginning.
In the beginning.
Yes, of course.
What's been the journey now? It's almost
Yeah.
inflammatory, and it's almost like this push of people being like, I'm not woke. I'm just what?
It just depends. So like woke came along as an African American understanding of waking up to a certain set of politics and a certain understanding of America. And I'm in this heavily quoting and not saying these are my ideas because I just did a ton of reading about it. Like waking up to structural inequality, waking up to racism, waking up to like the facts of life. And then woke became this politically weaponized concept in America, and because it's America, it was then used as talking points and then cultural commentary for the rest of the world of like, kind of just leftist positions, kind of just like new critical theory of structural inequality, of all kinds of things, race, gender, all kinds of intersectionality, class. And then it was weaponized in America by the Republicans to mean batshit people. Just objectively batshit, privileged, stupid people. But it comes with a lexicon. So like I'm called a soy boy a lot. And that essentially is a way of describing someone as just like being a bit femme, even though he's a guy, like trying to shame my masculinity for not being rough and tumble and tough and hardcore enough. And I think that's hilarious because soy is delicious. Like, soy
But
is
have
great.
you tried oat milk? Yeah, you know.
The best, okay, sometimes we get a lot of abuse. And most of it is just lame and we ignore it. But sometimes you've just got to give props because it's smart. Like it's funny.
Yeah.
And me and my brother who edits the show were called Sons of the Soy once. And we were like, I can't hate
just
that.
ingenious.
That's objectively really good. Like, I didn't think people like you with your beliefs had that capacity for wit. I back that.
They ate.
Yeah, no, they ate.
No, they ate. You can't even hate.
You can't. But I think if I have to give one simple answer, I think I think that wokeness is just like an attitude of empathy to more deeply understanding the latest ideas on how structural inequality and power and dispossession works. I think that's it. I don't think it's deeper than that.
Okay.
And I think that a lot of the political superstructure of the world, at the moment in particular, with fascism rising everywhere and awful demagogues getting power, is trying to crush empathy and to create fear between groups of people and to exploit that fear. And I think that people don't like woke because woke really just means listening, imagining what it's like to be you as opposed to me and really thinking about how the structural building of societies affects your life, I think. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, you could. You know, you were using, what was it? What was the soy one?
Son of the soy.
Son of the soy.
Soy
Son of the soy.
boys. Yeah.
It
Love
cued
that.
something, a conversation that I had quite a few months ago, actually, with a friend of mine. If you weren't aware, I'm very white and very female.
You should
So-
watch this podcast because you're going to learn something.
You're going to learn
from
some
this.
things. So why I'm saying that, I also live in Cape Town. I spend most of my time in Joburg where I feel a lot more comfortable. But I obviously have a very big group of white friends. And I'm not saying that I'm speaking on behalf of them or on behalf of all white people, but a sentiment that I have heard a lot is the term actually was pale males leaving South Africa because there's no opportunities left for them.
Oh, yeah, lol.
Yeah, lol, I know, big time. But what I want to do is ask you, I mean, I obviously have some very developed thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear you address a comment like that.
Pale males leaving South Africa.
Why are there is no opportunity left here in South Africa for white men? What do you think?
So I don't think that's true, but I think it needs to be framed in an understanding of class.
Yeah.
Because there are people, genuinely there are white people, white men who do not get into university because they got fine marks and then there were race quota prioritizations. There are white men who don't get jobs because of race quota prioritizations of companies. That does happen. Is it a common experience? I don't think so. No data seems to suggest that. And it's important to acknowledge that when having these kinds of conversations, because I think it can come off quite flippant, being like, ridiculous. Because then you're just like flippantly throwing away real life examples of real people. However, pale males leaving South Africa, I just think there needs to be a little bit more honesty about the fact that many people like this have extreme privilege and they just want to go and experience more of it with fewer complications.
Right.
Like, that's all it is. Yeah. They don't want to have to think about Black people complaining about the fact that they have a house in Camps Bay. Yeah. They don't want to have to think or feel about that, honestly. And I'm speaking specifically about men. Look, it's running.
Is it running?
It's blood. Oh, I'm speaking specifically about men because the calculus about leaving South Africa is extremely different for women. Gender-based violence here is nearly the worst in the whole world outside of active war zones. And so that's a different calculus. But for men, here's something else that I always want to contribute to these conversations is, specifically for English speaking, English home language, English culturally, white men like myself, we suffer from a colonial outpost complex where we know more about England and America than we do about South Africa. We watch more shows, we know more politicians, we know more celebrities, we know more sport, we know more musicians. And if we are really honest with ourselves, we have chosen a daily life which feels much more like, oh, I'm actually from the motherland, I'm just on tour. Or like, I happened to be born here, right? And so when a pale male goes to London, I'm like, enjoy your home. Like psychologically, you are going to a place which you know more about, care to know more about, and you don't know South African politicians, you don't know South African culture and music, you haven't bothered to find out. And so I think there needs to be a bit of honesty about, we're not fleeing lack of opportunity, we're going somewhere where we always felt we were more a part of than here. And if people were more honest about that, I could go, cool, then you better go. Because you clearly don't want to be here. And you're actually not even really participating in South Africa in fullness in your being here. Yeah. Going to Kruger and taking photos of a rhino is not being South African. The Brits do that too. They do it more than you, they can afford it. So yeah, I think that particularly with English-speaking white South Africans, there just needs to be more honesty about this kind of like colonial outpost mindset.
So you mentioned there, you were speaking about white people and wealth. I recall a TikTok video that you made about a year ago where you spoke about how white South Africans got rich. What was the exact?
That was the exact video. How did white South Africans get so wealthy?
Get so wealthy. Yes, thank you. That's what I wanted to say. And I guess I found it fascinating at the time. It was a couple of months before we started this podcast, so it played on my mind for quite a bit. And what played on my mind alongside that was this narrative of, well, I also work really hard for my money. I'm not talking myself. I'm talking about people with privilege in general, justifying their economic position. And so I guess I'd love for you to touch on a little bit about that system that supports wealthy whiteness in South Africa.
So we should call apartheid and colonialism what it was, which is white economic empowerment. I think that people love to bash BEE and there are grounds to bash BEE, but just take a hot second and think about what apartheid really was if we're going to frame it in those kind of economic government policy terms. So yes, all kinds of people worked extremely hard for their wealth, but the obvious refrain that I'm sure anybody who listens to this podcast already knows is that it's just they didn't have to overcome these raft of other obstacles and challenges to accrue that kind of wealth. But that video that I made about white economic empowerment was actually so narrow in scope because I wanted to nail it down to the incontrovertibles. Because what happens a lot with talking about apartheid and colonialism is obfuscation. Oh, did that really happen? Do we really know that happened? How much did that really happen? And so what I did was I went and found laws which were gazetted and passed in South Africa, the old South Africa's government, that no one can contest happened. And I just said, hey, maybe you should know about this stuff. And the system of laws was extraordinary, from preventing black laborers on the mines, because it all starts in the mines in South Africa. It all starts in the mines. From preventing black laborers from having certain kinds of work, to preventing unionization of black laborers, to then the kind of like big capital apartheid kind of laws. The ones that we all kind of know, even the ones that started before apartheid, like the Land Act of 1913 and all of that. And many people knew that already, although you'll be amazed how many people didn't. And it's a huge thing. I think history should be compulsory to matric, and I would reform our history syllabus to be far more detailed about South Africa. But the stuff that the apartheid government did that is less well known blows my mind. So like the fact that extraordinary social welfare programs were created for white South Africans, particularly Afrikaans ones, but white South Africans. There were many poverty-stricken white South Africans in the 1950s. There were very few by the 1960s. We should all talk about that. And the next time you complain about paying tax for a welfare grant, you should think that this is a minuscule contribution compared to what white South Africans were getting as recently as when your dad was alive.
Yeah.
And not just like newborn, like he was aged. He'd been living. He was around, you know. There was the fact that, another one that blew my mind, it's something like there were different rates of interest accumulation for wealth held for Black South Africans and white South Africans. So Black South Africans had their real pensions for the few jobs that they had fixed, irrespective of inflation, and could not grow, while white South Africans, it could grow an extraordinary amount. Then there were other things, like the SABC was created to create audience for white Afrikaans businesses to market their products. The SABC was created as a mind control tool, and they created all of these Black language or Black South African language radio stations to be able to control narrative. And then they built and distributed for free radios across townships to get Black South Africans to listen. It's a form of mass media that the SABC created to control the narrative about apartheid and information flow. But then the apartheid government did Afrikaner economic empowerment and allowed for cut rates or sometimes for free Afrikaans and white-owned businesses to advertise on the SABC, instantly giving them a mass consumer market. And you could literally just go now and Google the top 10 companies' origin in South Africa, and at least 5 of them blew up from that mechanic, from that specific mechanic. And all of these things are incontrovertible.
Yeah.
And the reason why I made that video was firstly so nobody could just say, nah, that's not what happened. It is what happened. I'm so sorry. There is so much evidence that that's what happened. Nobody denies that. No one reasonable with the knowledge of history. But secondly, so that white people now who feel disadvantaged and like maltreated by modern policies that benefit historic minority groups or oppressed groups can understand that what our governments are doing now pales in comparison with what the apartheid and colonial governments did to raise white people's wealth up, to literally raise them from the ground. So as much as you've pulled up your own bootstraps, the government did it too, and you should just think about that. That's why I think that video struck such a nerve.
And how's it playing out now for these white South Africans, looking back at the massive leg up that they got, and in response to, well, I need to leave because opportunities don't look as big for me as they did then. So how does that continue to play out now?
I think that very, very significant ignorance makes people feel downtrodden when they're not.
Correct, yeah.
And makes them just not understand. Like, if you're listening to this podcast or watching it and you are white, chances are your family is in the top 5 to 8% of South African earners. And that may not feel great, but take a real look around. There are 20 million people eligible for social grants. You are not eligible for a social grant. 350 Rand a month would not change your life. It would be what? 7 more coffees. Like, frankly. But for 20 million South Africans, like think about that. And then go, woe is me. And we can talk later.
Now, I think another thing is, this for me highlights what I think is important about this podcast, is we want to really highlight that racism, for me at least, speaking as a Black person, it has less to do, I mean, if Kobus doesn't like me, has negative feelings about me, I really don't care. But it's about how those feelings manifest into a structure that keep people like me oppressed and subservient and dependent and all, just literally oppressed. So I think this is going to a question I want to ask you about Luister.
Okay.
I did not know that you had an involvement in that up until I think a few months ago, just before I went to your show. But I think back of that place and time, being a young girl, being in high school, because it was in 2015, and being on Facebook and finally feeling like I have, watching my other friends, in university speak about these things. It was right before Feast Must Fall, but feeling like I can now put words to experiences on things like hair. And believe it or not, when you have had to assimilate into a predominantly white environment, you know that these things are instinctively wrong, but having someone put words to their experiences is a game changer. But also having white people sort of at the forefront speaking about this, it almost feels like, oh my goodness, I'm not being gaslit. It's a very trippy experience. It gets me angry two reasons. Okay, but we've been saying this, no one is paying attention.
Totally.
Right? And then the other, it's like, okay, well, at least there's a conversation happening somewhere.
Yeah.
If you're not going to listen to me, then listen to someone else. So
Totally.
what was your experience of making that as a student?
Yes.
Please, can you just highlight that for me? Yeah.
So, Luister, for those who don't know, was a film about racism and linguistic academic exclusion at Stellenbosch University. And I was at UCT and doing all this kind of basically broadcasting and platforming around Rhodes Fall. And Stellenbosch University was coming down unbelievably hard on their version of Rhodes Fall, which was called Open Stellenbosch. And they were about to face all these disciplinary hearings and all of this stuff. And when it gets mixed up in like the disciplinary processes of a university, you can rapidly lose your voice and your ability to speak publicly. And so when it looked like that was going to happen, I had a friend who was in Open Stellenbosch, and I said, well, you need to get everything you want to say out now before those disciplinary summons happen, and give it to the world. And if the world doesn't care, then fuck, I'm so sorry. But let's just give it to the world. And he said, cool, he'd go back and talk to Open Stellenbosch about it. And Open Stellenbosch said they were keen. And there were like 39 or 40 people who were willing to speak on the record, all of them of color. And then one academic who we also interviewed was a white woman who was like deeply a part of like trying to protect and help Open Stellenbosch in a variety of ways. And she was also horrifically treated by the university. And then I thought, I've never made a film.
So there's that.
No, who's going to make this film? I was like, who's going to make this film? And so I messaged a few directors who I think were better identity positionally placed. I messaged a bunch of directors of color, most of them student directors. I messaged a couple of women directors who were white women once all the directors of color said they weren't available, because I was like, we're
unavailable.
No. It was literally like, it was a Wednesday and the summons were supposed to come out the following Monday. And so I messaged them being like, can you go to Stellenbosch this weekend and turn around a film? And then they said, well, no. So in the end, I called 3 mates of mine, happened to all be white men, and we thought and like reasoned a lot about that. And we managed to club together cameras from UCT Film School. I still don't know if, well, now you're finding out that we shot on your cameras.
Exclusive.
We took microphone equipment from UCT Radio. UCT Radio, you are now just finding out.
Another exclusive.
And on that Saturday or Sunday, whenever it was, me, Eric, Marcus, and Declan drove through to an apartment at Stellenbosch University. I don't think it was a res room. It was like somebody's apartment. And we went to an upstairs room, and there were about 30 to 40 Open Stellenbosch members there. And
Must have been a big room.
No one was.
Nice and
only like 4 people in the
close.
room at a time, but it was incredibly hot. Yeah. Anyway, and we thought very carefully about how to do this, because similar to what I said with Umani earlier, the project was, how do we amplify without becoming involved? How do we be a megaphone without any filter of our own whiteness, our own coming in from the outside of the situation? How do we just have them say what they need and want to say and then get it out? And the strategy that we came up with was, Marcus had already been working in talk radio at the time, but I met him at UCT Radio, and he pre-interviewed everyone one by one before they came up to the room. And then he said to them, his only question was, what do you want to say? And they would just tell him, and he'd go, cool, that's great. And it was just the practice of saying it before getting to me. And then they came upstairs, and Declan was totally silent manning the cameras. Eric was totally silent manning the microphones. Marcus had then told me the 2 or 3 things that these people wanted to say, and I just prompted them. That was it, and then let them talk. And the only 2 times in the film where you hear my voice are where I said something like, so you said this thing about this, and their voice kind of runs over mine, so I had to have it in. But I was never seen, no one on the team was ever seen, and I was, I think, 2 lines of subtitle maybe. And we recorded for like 8 hours, and it was brutal.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like, woe is me, the white boy who coasts in and like experiences all of this trauma and pain. It was obviously harrowing for the Open Stellenbosch people who were terrified of having their academic careers destroyed, being hounded out of the university, facing disciplinary charges, the full weight of the university institution. But sitting through that for 8 hours, because that's how long it took to get 35 to 40 people to say their 15 to 20 minutes, or however long it was, 10 to 15 minutes, was hectic. And I remember Eric and I driving back in the car in like total silence. It was just total silence. And then something like I don't know if it took us a week and a half or half a week, but essentially we sat in a room, and I want to tell you the creative process so you can understand how hard we worked to remove ourselves. So we watched all of it, all the tape, 2 or 3 times. And then we broadly grouped it into type of testimony. Is this a racist incident? Is this a felt experience of structural cultural exclusion or social exclusion? Is this a story of academic exclusion based on language because the translation systems aren't working and so you can't understand what's going on, and even the translators don't know what the Afrikaans is for a high-end philosophy term in 3rd year, because that's not everyday Afrikaans language usage. And we categorized them, and then we went, okay, we want everyone to appear at least once, and we want balance. And so we made everyone was balanced, made sure everyone was spoken for and of different kinds of identity groups and different kinds of people. And then for each, and then narrative structurally, we tried to figure out, and I think the narrative goes racist incidents, linguistic exclusion, because we were thinking, if we only get a viewer for 6 to 10 minutes, we need to make sure they see certain things. And then it goes to like broader macro analysis, which is just like good storytelling. We just didn't know it at the time. It's like a good way to go about talking about that stuff, like you said earlier, with personal experience into ideas. And then we cut and cut and cut and cut and cut such that all of these interviews were kind of talking to each other. And then on, I think it was a Wednesday or Thursday morning, Then on a Monday or Tuesday, we sent it to Open Stellenbosch and said, watch this, we will change anything that you like. And they watched it and they said, no. That's what we want.
Go for it. Wow.
Put it out.
Wow.
And the next morning we put it on YouTube. And then I got on a plane to the Philippines. Not because I was fleeing, but because I had an international debating tournament to get to.
Wow.
And I got to the Philippines nearly 24 hours later and opened my phone and it was BBC, Al Jazeera, New York Times, CNN, worldwide news headline. And that's how that film happened.
It is incredible. It almost feels surreal being able to ask you about it because I remember how impactful it was. And younger people were sort of starting to reach a level of consciousness, which I think it was just a perfect storm to leading up to Peace Must Fall and everything that happened in that period of time.
And just can I add, it was the same time as Rhodes Must Fall. I think it was just after the statue came down. So there was this unique window where people could talk about Stellenbosch, because the problem with UCT and WITS is that they're so famous that the media and the public narrative doesn't have time to give attention to other universities.
Right.
So Stellenbosch was struggling for bandwidth at the time, and Open Stellenbosch was struggling for bandwidth. So the timing was very fortuitous. And if we had made that film 6 months later during Peace Must Fall, I don't think it would have gone anywhere, actually.
Wow. It was such a time and place then leading up to the protest, and people in and of itself don't understand the nature of protest. But
we've had that conversation.
We have,
right? In fact, it's an interesting one because we have the sense that let's take Fees Must Fall. Do white South Africans really understand why protest is necessary? And our view is when you come from it from a position of privilege, then you tend to say things like, oh, well, let the legal system do its job, or I'll just write a letter and then everybody will listen, and then my point is validated. So I guess that's exactly it, is how important protest is as a disruptor.
Yeah, protest happens because of systemic failure.
Right.
People don't want to protest. People don't want to make themselves available for tear gassing and beatings the way that happened outside Parliament in Cape Town. I was
Make
there
themselves
actually.
available, yeah. Nobody wants that.
Yeah, people aren't like, you know what I'm going to do today at 2 p.m.?
Yeah.
I'm going to go stand on Roland Street
Yeah.
and get beaten the shit out of
Yeah.
and flee from the cops and maybe get arrested. That's already a last resort and it happens because of systemic failure. And it happens to be white South Africans in this country. But anyone from a position of privilege where either you are wealthy enough to not need the system, or when you do need the system, like a system of laws, it works for you because you have enough wealth, they can't understand that. And I say they, I mean in the vast majority of cases, the system does work for me and it does help me. And when I need help from the law, it will help me. And I have done my absolute best through empathy and listening to try and fully understand the gravitas. But I think there's a limit to empathy in terms of standing in somebody else's shoes. But it's the job of privileged people to try. And the second thing is, protest is not a protest if it's approved. Then it's just a sparkling march. It's from if it's not from the protest region of France, if the authorities are chill with it and have given the blessing, then they have deemed it's not a threat to their power.
Yeah.
So of course it's disruption. If you didn't disrupt, you didn't protest, bro.
Yeah, there you
You
go.
know what I mean?
Are you hearing this, everyone? It's not about writing a letter, okay?
No, it's not. You have to
Yeah.
disrupt
Can't
the
we just sit down
system.
and talk about it though?
Yeah.
No.
Representatives.
No.
We have our representatives, surely.
Well, nobody sat down in the first place in a way that was constructive enough to change it, so obviously not. And that's another insidious thing about alternatives to protest are often a strategy by the powerful to delay protest.
Yeah.
It's a strategy of suppression. Come talk about it, fill out this form, sign this paper, we'll get back to you, stand in this line. That is literally a disempowerment strategy to prevent revolution and to prevent upset of order. And so often if someone says, no, but just do this, but you've done it 4 times, and they say, this time it'll work, you still need to go, no. You've pushed us here, now we're going to cause a ruckus. And that's the right thing to do.
I mean, I was at Rhodes University at the time. We had the RU reference list breakout. Yeah, that was in my...
I consulted for that film that they made about it.
Oh my goodness.
After Luister, they messaged me and asked me for cut feedback. Yes, I like that film.
It's actually quite sad. I always thought that would go a little bit more viral like Luister. But
it
again...
did well in some film festivals around the world, but it didn't. Maybe it suffered a little bit of the what I talked about, fees must fall, bandwidth kind of stuff. Yeah.
Also there were some hectic consequences. I remember as a student watching the women that led that protest and watching the consequences and the wrath of the institution that was unleashed upon them. It's something that stays with me today. Nobody just protests or stops the system if exactly what you're saying. You don't just go and do that because it's a great day. I'm just going to get tear gassed and bulleted and arrested. So it's something that sticks with me today, and it is a point of frustration how little South Africans understand of it. And I think you've highlighted that so well.
As little as wealthy South Africans understand.
Oh,
the vast majority of South Africans understand. Like protest is a form of anti-apartheid struggle. The vast majority of South Africans understand.
Yeah. Well, privileged South Africans
do not understand.
I guess I almost want to just end on this kind of thought. So, if we were to assume that privileged South Africa have noticed that there is some sort of disconnect between them and their understanding of the reality that is South Africa. And given the fact that here we're talking about media, right? When we're talking about media, we're really just talking about our own circles of influence. Yours is bigger than mine, for example, but we all have space to have these conversations. Sure. How do you suggest we show up in those spaces? Like, how do we, our whole mission with this podcast is to get people to join a conversation. Sure. It's uncomfortable and we don't have the language. We, just generally speaking, because we've never done it together as interracial, we sit with this conversation in siloed groups where other people will agree with us. But when we take it nationally, there's the opportunity for criticism and cancelling. That is a long question, Dan. And what I'm really asking you is, what do you think is the way to show up and enter a conversation like this?
I firstly think that everybody knows when they're being bigoted or when they are saying something that some other people of another group wouldn't like. Men are the most misogynistic in just groups of dudes.
Yeah, that's true.
They're the most misogynistic in just groups of dudes. White people are most racist when there are no people of color around. Wealthy people are most crassly anti-poor when there are only wealthy people around. And so if you're at an intersection point of privilege, you are the only destabilizing force in that conversation. You are the only one who can go, what the fuck did you just call your mother? Excuse me. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? You really think all women are like that? You really think all women are like that? And you don't need to be aggressive, but maybe you want to be. The situation is, situations are situation specific and you can choose your own way of going about it. But if the CEOs be sitting in their boardrooms and one day you'd be lucky enough to be in that boardroom, you can say something, guys. It's great. It's cool. And I don't really take getting cancelled very seriously.
No,
because let's be honest, Louis C.K. didn't get cancelled. People still listen to Michael Jackson. Let's be honest.
True.
Once people
Chris
have
Brown
enough,
in a sold-out concert.
Once people have enough of a following, they're not going to get cancelled. It's just more people going to talk about how they don't like them, and their fans will double down. So I don't worry about that very deeply. Although I know that for the average South African, and this includes myself, it's very uncomfortable if you're in a family environment or a friend's environment to put a friendship on the line, to make a family occasion uncomfortable. And something that I think about a lot is for older folks, I think that many of our older folks, our grandparents and maybe our parents, are more willing to listen than you would give them credit for if you don't come from a place of, you fucking freak.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
if you go, hey, so I know that when you were in your 50s, this was the set of beliefs, but now we do it a bit differently. What do you think about that? They may not agree with you immediately. They saw you as a child shitting yourself in a diaper. So like, they're probably going to be like, who the fuck are you to try and tell me about this?
Yeah.
But maybe you just leave it there. And then they remember that they love you and they've got this relationship with you that they care about and think about a bit more. And then they become a little conversation, kind of a little more slowly. Maybe you'll get somewhere. I think that's important. And the second thing is, I think that South Africans have a duty and a benefit to encounter real South Africa. One, because to be a meaningful and useful part of South African life, you can't live in your bubble of privilege because you're not living in South Africa. And that creates you as a person who is unrelatable to the vast majority of other South Africans. I'm not even talking about white South Africans who the only black person they know is their domestic worker. I'm talking about like if you bump into a black person or get talking to them at a restaurant or in a urinal line or whatever, men love to yap, and you just don't know anything about the rest of South Africa, of course there's no conversation. Of course there's no, it's like, you know, someone's like, wow, did you see Tyler? And you're like, Tyler who? Harold. like, you know what I mean?
Not Tyler Perry, child.
Yeah, like, come on. Like, so you have a duty as a meaningful and fulfilled part of, like being somebody who is a meaningful contributor to the South Africa that I think even these people want to get involved and learn. But the other secret is that if you get involved, you may discover that you really love, I don't know, Questa's voice. It's such a good voice. May he never take a lozenge.
Please.
May he never take a Strepsil because he will lose that voice.
He has the Stony ad, and I'm like, no, don't do it.
Makes so much sense. But like, you may discover that there's actually a huge chap about a lot of South African life that you know nothing about, and so and that may just enrich your life. And so yeah, that's what I hope that more people think about doing from a place of humility. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. We have one more question for you.
Okay.
Given the nature of this podcast that where we speak about race and privilege, and we try and we're trying to make it personal so that it's super relatable, so that people can see how their voice is relevant in this discussion. Who do you think would be a good guest to have on next? Have I put you on the spot? I've properly put you on the spot.
That's such a good question. Oh, she'd never do it.
I know. Oh, she would not. Oh, would she?
She'd never do it.
Oh.
No, she'd never do it.
We might need to get her name after.
Yeah, after this wraps, you don't know us.
You don't know how persistent we are.
So I have had some really phenomenal conversations with Zethu Kola. That's not the person. That's not the person I was thinking about just now.
Oh,
I'm comfortable saying that on camera.
Okay.
I'm comfortable saying Zethu on camera. I adore Zethu. I've had some of the most enriching and fascinating conversations with her. I'm having her on my radio show tomorrow. We are mates. And I think that she is a fascinating person thinking about intersections of class, race, power in business, like ANC history, kind of like rural upbringing, boarding school, and like a privilege, like all the. I'm now talking about her like I wrote her Wikipedia page.
We are obsessed with her.
She'd be a phenomenal guest.
Like, no, seriously, I wish you could see like our strategist Sarah's smile on her face, because that's all we speak about. Zethu.
I adore Zethu. I think you should get Zethu on.
Okay.
Done. Say less.
Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's
been really fun. It's been like pretty much this was our thing, hey?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're really excited.
Yeah,
there you go, nails.
LOL nails.
Can LOL
you
nails.
have,
Get the nail polish.
Yeah, well,
it's
you don't know.
We forgot like about that.
This is gonna go so well with my other tattoos.
Cool. Thanks, Dan. And guys, thanks for joining us. We are looking forward to, in fact, let me tell you what we are looking forward to is growing our TikTok and Instagram pages. Please. And finding us on YouTube and, all the places, Spotify, whatever. But please help us to grow our platform and join our conversation. See you next time.